What's going on, guys? Thanks for tuning in. I'm back with another great tutorial for you guys. And today we're going to be talking about making your subject stand out. And there's a few specific things that you can do, and we're going to talk about all of these today. So the first thing that you can do is you can make your subject pop out using the brightest part of the image. So your viewer's eye is going to naturally go to the brightest part of the image. They're also going to go towards more saturation or more color. And then another thing they're going to go to is more contrast. So you have brightness, color, and contrast. Those are the three main things. And then also with your composition, you can frame your subject. So if you frame them, that's also going to be a good indication that your viewer's eye is going to go into the middle of that frame. So let's go ahead and get started here. And for this image, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start pulling up the exposure just a little bit because it is a little bit underexposed. Maybe about half a stop, a little over maybe. And then one of the things that we talked about was contrast. So contrast is a very big key into pulling your viewer's eye into your subject. So we don't want contrast everywhere. We don't want a ton of it anyways, everywhere. So I'm actually going to pull this all the way down. And then I'll just do my basic adjustments. The highlights look okay. The shadows can probably be brought up a little bit just to bring detail back down here in this area here. And then the blacks, I can pull those up a little bit because once we add contrast, it's going to darken those blacks down a little bit. So we definitely want to make sure we have enough room for when we add that contrast. Clarity pulled back to about -13. That just kind of helps with the skin smoothness. Detail, my sharpening will go up maybe, zoom in here a little bit, about 70, 75. Yeah, that looks good there. We'll pull the luminance noise reduction up and we'll get rid of some of that grain. Again, we don't want to get rid of all of it, but we do want to get rid of a little bit. So 26 looks to be okay. We'll go in here into our lens profile corrections. We'll enable that, and that's just going to help out with the lens distortion a little bit. Again, notice my vignetting, I always bring that back down. I actually like the lens vignette that I get. That's another thing. So we talk about the brightest part of the image. When you vignette the edges, as long as it's subtle and you can't really tell too much, that's going to help draw that in too. So it's all these little things that you pull together in order to create a pleasing image. It's all just little things put together. It's never just one thing that makes an image look decent. We can go ahead and straighten this, and I have it set at 5x7. That's about the frame that I want. And then we're ready to open it in Photoshop. So we'll get this open here. And then first thing I want to do is, since I wasn't really quite prepared for a shoot, I didn't plan on what clothes for her to wear, what the black background was going to look like, or any of that. So I don't really like this this pink color on her shirt. I don't think it really matches what I'm going for anyways. It doesn't look horrible, but it just doesn't match for what I'm going for. So the first thing I'm going to do is, this is going to be kind of a bonus, I'm going to change the color of her shirt. So what I'm doing is I just pulled up a hue saturation adjustment layer, clicked on this little hand tool here, and then I'm just going to click once right on her shirt. I'm going to pull the hue all the way over so I can see exactly what's selected. So what you'll notice is not all of her shirt's selected, so we need to expand the range a little bit. So it's more in the reddish purple areas, so I'm going to pull this way and just keep going until you select everything, but you're not selecting into other areas that you don't want. Like I don't want to select into this area here. So now that I have that selected, I can start adjusting to the color that I want, which I think for a base, I'm going to make it a little bit more yellow, like that. And then I'm going to click on my mask, hit Control or Command I, hit B for the brush tool. I'm going to toggle to white, and then I'm just going to brush this in at 100%. All over her shirt. And one thing you'll notice is if I go outside here, it's not painting anything because we selected that range. Now for the next step, we may have to do just like a quick selection, because that will affect, this next step will affect everything. Okay, so now that that's done, it's still not quite the color I want, so I'm going to, let's add a solid color adjustment layer, and I'm going to go kind of into the oranges, because that's close to the color that I want. And then I'm going to set that to multiply. And then I'll hit Control or Command I. And then we're going to go back to the background layer here, and I'm just going to use my quick selection tool here. And I'm going to select her shirt, just the yellow part of her shirt. And if it goes over, it's okay. Just hold the Alt or Option button, and then click on the areas that you don't want it to affect and drag, and that'll deselect it. And you may have to do this a couple times, going back and forth, maybe zoom in a little bit, and just add that there. For the most part, it's doing a pretty good job. There's other ways to select things, but for this tutorial, this is probably the easiest way just to do that. And then I'll deselect all this. Okay, now my shirt's selected. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click here on my mask, hit Shift and Delete, and then I'm going to fill that selection with white. And then hit Command D to deselect, and there you have it. It's selected. And then I don't really want it this dark, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the opacity all the way down and start bringing it up until I get to the color that I want. And I would say maybe right around 40, 42, somewhere around there. That looks good to me. Okay, so we can do the same thing with a couple other areas. So we can do, let's change the pants. So we'll go into our hue saturation, do that same process again. Click the hand, click on the pants, which are going to be in the blues. We're going to adjust this all the way over, and it pretty much selected. We didn't really have to change anything. It selected all of her pants without spilling over, so that's good. So now we can figure out what color we want. And I'm going to go for maybe like a green to match the bushes. So maybe right around in there. And then another thing we can do is we can actually adjust the lightness and bring that down. And that kind of takes a little bit of the saturation out, and then it also darkens it down just a little bit. And we can always fine tune this later too. So I think right there is about, that should be good. So I'll hit Control or Command I, B for the brush tool, make sure my mask is selected, flow at 100%, and I'm just going to paint that on. And I'm not being too careful or too picky because it's not going to spill over. If you do see it spill over a little bit, just hit X to toggle to black, and then just paint out of the areas that you don't want it to be in. Okay, so there's that part. So now we're going to go back to the layer flatten image, and we're going to go back to making it pop out a little bit. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my selective color and then add my color pop preset here. And then since I'm going over the whole image, I'm only going to bring it up to maybe about 30 just to add a little bit of color all over. Hit Control or Command J. Boost that all the way up to 100. Make sure my mask is selected, Control or Command I. And then I'm going to brush it on with white just over my subject. And what you'll notice is not only is it adding a little bit of color, it's also adding contrast. So you have color and contrast that you're using to make your subject pop out all in one tool here. And then after that's done, the next thing you can do is you can actually duplicate this selective color layer again and maybe at like 60% and Control or Command I. And then I'm actually going to brush over my model here again. But then I'm also going to brush the ground. And then I'm going to brush over the bushes a little bit. So we have, what you'll notice here is we have like three different variations here. So we have most of the color and contrast is going to be on the model. And then the next amount is going to be on the ground and these bushes to make those stand out a little bit less than the model. And then we have the background that doesn't stand out at all. We didn't really add a whole lot of color to that. So it's almost like you have, you know, three different focal planes here. So that kind of helps with drawing the eye in. So the next thing we're going to talk about is light. So the lightest part, the brightest part of the image is where is another place where most people look. So if I create a new layer, hit Shift Delete, and fill it with 50% gray, we're actually going to do some dodging and burning. So I'm going to change this to soft light here. I'm going to pull my brush all the way down to 1% on the flow. And then I'm going to go in and paint with white to paint in highlights, or paint with black to paint in shadows. And all I want to do is I just want to emphasize where there's already light and shadows. So the light parts, we'll go with those first. I'm just going to brighten up her forehead just a little bit here. I'm going to brighten up the bridge of her nose. I'm going to brighten up her cheeks and her eye on both sides here. And notice I'm not going too far down into here because there's shadow there. I'm just following where the light is already at. So again, like underneath her chin here, I'm going to add a little bit of brightness there, maybe some right here. And then for her face, that's all I'm going to do for the brightness. And then to add shadow, I'm going to go maybe a little bit around the edges here, just where there's already a shadow. And then we'll go underneath here where there's already a shadow. Right underneath the lip, there's usually a shadow there. On the sides of the nose, and that creates a little bit of dimension on the nose there. And then you can go into, I'm still in my shadows, and I'm just going to emphasize this here, right under her arm, and then emphasize the shadows here, and then maybe in these creases here, I'll emphasize those a little bit. And like I said, I'm only pretty much going where there's already shadows. So down the leg here. And once you start doing this, you'll start to understand what areas you need to hit, what areas not to hit, and with what, with either the dodge or the burn. So brighten this here. There's already some light here that we can emphasize here. So I'll show you the before and after on that part, on the dodge and burn. And if it's too much, you can always pull back the opacity and then just pull it up to where you think it looks decent. So I think I did go a little overboard here, so I'm going to pull it down to maybe about 40, and that'll just give me that little bit of pop there. Okay, so there's that. And I'm just going to add a little bit more in these areas, because I kind of really want this to pop, and then maybe go over the creases here, the light parts in this crease. And again, it just adds a little bit more dimension. And you can be as particular as you want. You can go all the way down into these small creases here and do each individual one. I generally don't take it that far unless I really have to. And then maybe even the hair, we didn't really do much with the hair, so we'll just kind of paint in these highlights here in the hair. And this is where the light's hitting on the top, so I'm going to brighten this. And then it's hitting here as well, so I'm just going to brighten this area. And then we'll go into our shadows. We'll switch over to our black, and then we'll paint in shadows in these areas and just kind of transition them in. It's almost like painting, basically. And I think I may want to add just a little bit more shadow in here. And that's pretty much it for that. So next we'll move on to another way to brighten. So we'll go into our curves, and then I'm just going to pop the middle up just a little bit here, and then we'll hit Control or Command I to invert that, flow at 100%. Using a soft brush, I'm just going to make the brush really big and just click once. And then you'll notice how that adds kind of like a spotlight basically, and you can adjust the opacity on that however you want. I think I want it a little bit bright, so we'll go right around 75-ish. That's good there. And then we can even add another curves adjustment layer and maybe pull down the shadows a little bit here, and then pull up the highlights a little bit, like in the brighter areas, and that just kind of gives us a little bit of contrast there. So if I turn that off and on, you'll notice it just adds a little bit more contrast. And I can just go in, hit Control or Command I, and then I'll just brush that on where I want it. So at 100%, I'm just going to brush it right over my model. And with every step that I take, I'm basically trying to pop out the model more and more and more. And that should be about it. So now if we go back down here, there's our before, there's our after. Notice how it just kind of pops her out a little bit more. I do want to maybe go back down to the selective color and just pull some of that color out. I definitely urge you to, walk away every once in a while and come back, because colors can look good at one point in time, but after staring at it for too long, it can really not be what you think it is. So if you walk away and come back, it could look completely different than what you think it actually looks. So that's it for this tutorial. I hope that helps somebody out. That's your way to pop out your subject. And please like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff, and I will see you in the next one.